Thank you everyone for joining me today. And my special guest is Shayne Swenson. And he is, let me pull up my bio here. He's an Orthodox Christian iconographer and oil painter specializing in Eastern, Western art and iconography. He studied at the University of Idaho and studied Byzantine iconography at St. Stephen's College, right, Shayne?
Sort of. It's the St. Stephen's course. It's through the Antiochian Archdiocese. So it's. I did that briefly. It's not like I'm, affiliated, like, with them specifically. But yeah, it's sort of like it's the course that they do.
Is it a seminary, St. Stephen's? Is it?
Yeah, it's the course that you do usually before ordination through the Antiochian Archdiocese. It's kind of like a correspondence course, and you go back for a few weeks to the Antiochian village. So
cool. First, I got to ask you about because you don't look like a typical iconographer. First, I got to ask you about your tattoos.
Well, what do you want to know?
Because here I got some here.
Oh yeah,
I got here, and then I got here,
nice.
And then I got some others I can't show you.
Nice.
But you're a lot younger than me. So I mean, when I got because you got like full sleeves, don't you?
Oh yeah, I've got That's my day job.
Oh, so you're a tattoo artist too?
Oh yeah, I've been a tattoo artist for 16, 17 years now. That's my day job. Yeah.
I didn't even know that. Okay, wow. Okay.
I tend to
like a minute in. I know something.
Well, there you go. I tend to keep that separate a lot of the times from my iconography vocation, business, if you want to call it that, just because, not because I care really, or I have a problem with it, but just because sometimes people get weird. If some people get weird about that, like there's some kind of problem. So I've my spiritual father told me maybe kind of keep those things separate. Don't overlap them as much is kind of what I'm saying. So
yeah,
I don't hide it, but
okay. Well, you can't. When I got my tattoos, I mean, it was like late 80s, early 90s. So yeah. I mean, you couldn't find a tattoo artist at the suburban strip mall.
Right.
They were still kind of back alley. It was like bikers, gay leather guys, BDSM fetish people. I mean, it was a little more fringe. But I mean, back then, if you had like a neck tattoo, you were hardcore. So I mean, it's a little more common.
Oh yeah, I do neck tattoos on like soccer moms and stuff now. Like
wow.
No, most of my clientele, I sort of specialize in one style of tattooing. I used to do, walk-ins and all the stuff that you were probably used to back in the 80s and 90s. I started in like the early 2000s, so it was still pretty similar. The industry's a lot different now. There's people from all walks of life that get tattooed, but most of my clientele I have a lot of white collar clientele, a lot of blue collar, but it's normal people, average people. I really don't have a lot of like countercultural people. I mean, the counterculture has sort of become the mainstream culture. I mean, that probably better than anyone. So it's just sort of a normal thing now. So
yeah. I don't mean to get on a sidetrack.
Oh no, it's fine.
But I remember, when I got my tattoos, that the lady, she was a tattoo artist that did my tattoos. She was saying, occasionally, like the housewife will come in and want a small little like rose, on her foot or somewhere ankle where somebody can't see it. But now, it's much more visible.
Right. It's definitely not this like rebellious thing anymore. It's really bizarre to me because it used to be like if you get your hands and your neck, and like I used to have a tattoo of a cross on my face here, but I immediately regretted it after I got it. And so I've had laser removal done too on my neck and throat. I just kind of got sick of the visible tattoos. So if there's any advice I can give any young people that are going to watch this, it's true. Your parents are right. Don't get visible tattoos on your face and neck and stuff, because as you get older in life, you might want to blend into the crowd more. You might not want to express yourself as much as you do when you're 19. So, and tattoos aren't, I mean, you can take it back and you can get laser removal done, but it's extraordinarily expensive and it's really painful. So
I know. And, I kind of regret my tattoos because mine are, they're 30 years old and they start fading, they start bleeding. It was kind of funny because I ran into, maybe about 10 years ago, so this was 20 years after I got my tattoos. I ran into the lady that did mine, and she's like, "Oh, come in, and we'll do some work on these." And I'm like, "No."
Did you get them in San Francisco?
Yes, and I was,
Really?
yeah, I was like, "No, I don't want to do it." So I mean, they're fading, so yeah, you have to look at them, and
Well, in San Francisco, probably the single most legendary living American tattooer, the icon, is Don Ed Hardy. I'm sure you've seen the goofy clothes from
oh
like
yes,
10 years ago.
yes.
Yeah, Don Ed Hardy. He's probably the most iconic, most influential American tattooer alive today. He doesn't tattoo anymore. He doesn't have to, but he's influenced probably everybody in my generation on back. So
Yeah.
San Francisco.
Yep, that's where it was.
Yep.
Let's start. Well, hey, this is sort of a related iconography. So since a lot of people that might watch this are Roman Catholic,
Right.
They might have a difficult time understanding the role or the significance of iconography in Orthodox Christianity as opposed to Roman Catholicism. So I mean, there are actual miraculous images in Orthodoxy. Like I wrote a couple of down. The miraculous image of Novgorod, excuse my pronunciation, the Mother of God of Vladimir, the Mother of God of Kazan. I guess the only corollaries we'd have in Catholicism is like Our Lady of Perpetual Help, which is essentially Byzantine, but it's in Rome.
Right.
And then Our Lady of Czestochowa in Poland, and then of course Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico.
Right. I mean, there's well, so in Orthodoxy we have a ton. I mean, merge streaming icons are, I don't want to say common because that sort of like devalues what they are, but it's extraordinarily common in Russia, as common as a miracle can be, and throughout the world. In Greece on Mount Athos, miraculous icons are yeah, I mean, I guess you can't really call them common. I don't know what else to call them. I mean, they're very prevalent, I guess is the right way to put it. And so like probably the most famous in the States is the miraculous merge streaming icon, the Hawaiian Iveron icon. Have you heard of that?
Yes, I have.
Okay. The Orthodox Church.
Actually, I had some of the oil. A priest gave me some of the oil.
Yeah, it comes to San Francisco there to the cathedral. We've talked before that you've been to quite a bit. That's where my patron saint. That's where his relics are too. Saint John Maximovich is my patron saint. So yeah, I've been down there to venerate him a few times. Yeah, I love Saint John. But yeah, the Hawaiian Iveron icon is it travels all around the world, all around the United States. I won't really go into the history about that too much. There's tons of stuff online and on YouTube even about the history of that icon, and why it's significant to the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, and just to the greater Russian Orthodox Church. But yeah, I mean, miraculous icons they're common in Orthodoxy, but I mean, I've read a little bit that there's there's some merge streaming statues, and they have like, I don't know, tears and stuff like that. I don't know how legit some of that stuff is, but I've heard that in Poland and in Mexico, there's some of that stuff too. Am I right, or is that sketchy? I don't know.
No, I think you're correct. There's been stories of statues of Mary, like weeping tears or weeping blood. Probably Akita is the most famous.
Yeah, maybe that's the one.
In Japan, yeah. And icons have played like, because I was reading like historical significance where they were decisive in battles, and the priests and the people would process with the icons. So
absolutely.
Yeah, it's a very significant.
Yeah, I mean, there's stories in Alaska. So this is another rabbit trail we could go down for hours and hours. But in Alaska, where the Russian Orthodox Church had sent over missionaries, monks from Russia, when there was a lot of Russian traders were fur trading at the time. This is like the 1700s, 1800s. And there's a saint named Saint Herman of Alaska. He's super well known, very popular saint in the Orthodox Church. Anyway, there's a story, I think, where there was like an earthquake out to sea, and there was a tsunami coming, and he placed an icon of the Mother of God like on the shore, and the water went around where he had placed the icon and spared the village. And this is a common story that even those Alaska natives who aren't pious, they know this story, and they talk about it. So
yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, Saint Herman of Alaska.
Saint Herman of Alaska. Yeah.
Yes. So, and there's a lot of I don't know how to describe it. There's a lot of legend and mythology around icons too, where like Saint John the Evangelist supposedly painted the first icon of Our Lady. Yeah.
Right.
And then there's the because there was some controversy around the icons. I mean, people probably heard of the iconoclasm in the Byzantine Empire, which I guess was 8th century. And the iconoclasts followed the second commandment very strictly, where you would not have any graven images of God at all. And then there's that interesting icon, the Mandilion, right?
Right.
Which is, and I didn't understand. I've seen it a lot. There's a lot. I'll talk about it later with you. There's a lot of themes and subjects in iconography, and that's just the head of Christ without a neck. So it's supposedly, what do they call it? The icon made without hands. Is that what it's?
Yeah, it's the Mandilion, or the icon not made by hands. And just the brief story of it is that now that this is not, I mean, this isn't in scripture or anything. So this is I hate calling it a legend, but this is what was passed down about the story behind this icon. I think it was King Ahab. He had some kind of skin ailment, like some sort of leprosy or something like that. And he'd heard about Jesus and his healing ministry. And so he had sent his emissaries, or sent word that he wanted Christ to come visit him. Well, Jesus couldn't do that at the time. So what happened is he had, there's just so much of this stuff. Christ had wiped his face, or placed a napkin on his face. And his image was sort of superimposed onto this napkin or this cloth. And it made its way back to King Ahab, and he was subsequently healed. Now, there's also a connection between that and the Shroud of Turin, which is interesting. And that's a whole, iconography is such a rich topic. I mean, one of these specific things that we've talked about, we could spend 3 hours talking about. It's that in depth. So
it was interesting that too, when I was reading about, I should say too, I have a bit of so just like I'm not speaking off the top of my head, but my degree's in art history, and I went to UC Berkeley. But at that time in the early 90s, in university you study what the professors are interested in. And at that time, nobody was interested in iconography. I took a bunch of courses on Romanesque art, early medieval. A lot of it was a 19th century French Impressionism, the male gaze, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was, even back then, I was a heathen and not interested in, Christianity, but there was something about iconography that captivated me. I was raised, I have to say, my dad is Sicilian. He grew up Byzantine Catholic in Sicily. Always had icons around. I grew up with them as a kid, specifically Our Lady of Perpetual Help. And I'm kind of curious about you as a Western guy. I'm a Swenson. You're what, Swedish? You're not Russian, so.
No, I wish. I'm a born again Russian. I don't know. I love Russia. I'm Russian Orthodox. No, I'm Norwegian, mostly Norwegian and Swedish. So what's funny is my family had told me my whole life that we're mostly Swedish, and then I did one of those 23andMe tests.
Cool, yeah. And
I'm mostly Norwegian. So yeah,
cool.
It's bizarre. I don't know how we ended up with all the Swedish recipes, but
Scandinavian. But I grew up with those icons and that sort of, I call it that hard judgmental stare that some of them have. They look right at you and into you, and they fascinated me, and scared the heck out of me when I was a little kid.
Yeah, that's very intentional. I mean, I'm sure you know this. It's that look is very intentional. It's sort of made to divorce any kind of emotion or maybe not emotion in the person that's looking at the icon, but emotion in the face of that which is being portrayed. It's supposed to portray sort of a transfigured state, which is, I mean, some of it is the accidents of, you know, Greco-Roman, the aesthetics of Greco-Roman art that iconography is sort of based off of. There's a lot of pagan influence as far as the aesthetic goes. Within Orthodox iconography, there's this misunderstanding, I think, with especially a lot of converts, Protestant converts especially, where they tend to think that everything about iconography, from the look to the colors to everything, was somehow revealed, that God, you know, like it came down from heaven, and it wasn't necessarily a product of what came out of the culture in which Christianity came out of, you know what I mean? So there's some of that going on too. But yeah, that when you look at an icon, I mean, my wife, there's an icon of Christ on the Iconostasis at the parish we go to. And to my wife, he looks very authoritative and very mean is not the right word, but he looks extremely serious, you know? And for me, when I look at it, he just seems somber and very, I don't know. He just seems peaceful, but at the same time, like there's just a neutralness, and I mean that in a very good way. But to my wife, I mean, it looks like he's, you know, giving her the what for or something. I don't know.
I think they change their continent sometimes too, because I remember in the early '90s, because that would have been right after the fall of the Soviet Union. I used to go to these art auctions, and I bought an old icon, and I dragged it around with me for years. And I have to say, it changed. The continents changed, and the expression kind of changed depending on my interior state.
That's true. That's really true. I mean, I personally, so I grew up Catholic. You know, that's sort of I grew up nominally Catholic, I should say. I went to Catholic school for a few years. So that's sort of how I grew up. And then, you know, family-wise, we kind of drifted away from the church. And I ended up going to, when I was, I think about 15, I started attending this Pentecostal church with a friend of mine in school, because I was kind of a loser in high school. I didn't have a lot of friends or anything. And so I started attending this youth group with this young man who ended up becoming one of my best friends. And I got saved, you know what I mean? The old Pentecostal style, got saved. And anyway, yeah, through a long way around, I ended up, you know, leaving Christianity as I got older, and, you know, started questioning certain things. And then I came back to theism through the Catholic Church. So, because that was what was most, I guess, that I realized I didn't know anything about Catholicism. So when I left evangelicalism, it was mostly because I wasn't finding deep philosophical answers to these problems I was having, these intellectual problems. So anyway, my point in telling you that is my natural setting is one of skepticism and cynicism. I'm sort of a cynical person. I don't like that, but I'm very misanthropic about the world. Yeah, I don't know. So when I hear something like you say that the countenance of the icon changed as your interior life changed, you know, my first reaction is like, you know, well, I don't know, maybe that's this and that. But I mean, I don't know, the longer I'm Orthodox, the older I get, the more I realize that, you know, those things might be your personal experience, but especially when you dig into the world of iconography, and what I said about my wife earlier, everyone's experience of an icon is different. It's the same because the aesthetic and everything is the same, the aesthetic, but it's different based upon where you're at in your journey. I hate that word, but where you're at spiritually, you know what I mean? And like I have an icon here in my studio that's that way. It's an icon of St. John of Shanghai. And when I first got the icon, it's a print icon, you know, it's small. When I first got it, I thought, you know, I thought he looked kind of goofy, to be honest. I was like, but the more I get to know, I mean, I know it sounds bad, but I mean, I thought he looked kind of goofy. I was like, why does he?
Well, he was kind of a holy fool. So
He was, I mean, he definitely was. I mean, I don't know if you know, some of the holy fools will purposefully do those things. I don't know if he purposefully did that just because of his physical stature. People really didn't take him too seriously. But the more I got to know his life and the more I got to know him, the more that sort of disdain for his physical appearance that I saw in the icon, the more that changed, and the more I realized that maybe I don't know, maybe there's more maybe there's more to it than just my initial hunch about his physical appearance. I don't know.
No, and I've never had any kind of locutions or anything, but the changes, I should say, in the face of that icon were very subtle. It wasn't like it was a dramatic, you know, where she had a frown and then she had a smile. And,
which icon was it?
It was the third hand. You know what it's called?
Oh yeah, yeah.
What is it called? The proper art?
I don't know.
Our Lady of Saint something the third. It's got 3 hands.
Yeah, and man, I have a huge book of icons. I could.
Oh wait, here I've got right behind me. See, you know, every good Orthodox, you're supposed to have an icon corner. So,
oh wow, that's so cool.
So there you go.
Wow, that's
so there she is there.
So that was your dad's?
No, that's actually my mom gave that to me, and I've got the Pantocrator there, and I've also got, what's the name of that one? Our Lady of Unexpected Joy.
See, yeah. See, that specific time period, that specific style, I really like. A lot of Orthodox, they tend to not really like the more. I mean, I guess that's not like an academic icon, but I like icons that have. I mean, I like all icons, but I really like the ones that have sort of a Western influence a little bit.
I want to get into that with you too.
Okay.
There's something about there's a, I think this is what attracted me to icons even as a heathen, is or as an unbeliever, I guess you should say, is that it has they have a timeless quality.
Right.
And I think part of that has to do with I think what distinguishes, you know, icons a lot of times is the flatness, the no background,
right?
Which is usually it usually has like a gold background, and then I compare sometimes icons to like the Mona Lisa, which is like a secular icon, and you have that deep background, that fanciful background in the Mona Lisa, which I think kind of dates it as very like high Renaissance, and then the perspective in I don't want to get too deep. The perspective in Renaissance art is often that vanishing point,
right?
You know, and in iconography, it's kind of like a reverse vanishing point where it how did I put it?
I think they call it inverse perspective.
Yeah. So it's that two-dimensionality. The vanishing point ends with the viewer, not in the back. You know what I'm saying?
Right. A lot of this stuff, to be honest, a lot of it was unintentional, I guess. Not all of it, but a lot of the aesthetics and stuff are unintentional. But like everything else in Christianity, it sort of developed later on, and a lot of these theological meanings were attributed to certain things that were already there or further developed. That's what I meant when I was talking earlier about how a lot of people think that when they see an icon, that everything in the icon has symbolism that was revealed, like it's part of the deposit of faith. And it is, insofar as, you know, in a macro sense, how important an icon is to worship and our faith, and even Christology, who Christ is. Iconography is really important in that way. But there's certain things like you said, like inverse perspective, or the fact that there's no cast shadows, stuff like that. Those are things that a lot of oftentimes, I should say, are because of the roots of the aesthetic, the Greco-Roman roots of iconography, that have now, all of those things have been almost pulled through time and developed, and theological meaning has been ascribed to that stuff. You know what I mean? So it's definitely very interesting, very rich, and different areas of the world, whether it's Russia or Serbia or Greece. Canonical icon is the same, but it's really interesting to see how each culture has sort of, they have their own schools and styles, and how these things have sort of been elaborated upon and built upon over the ages.
Talk to you about that too. And yeah, there's kind of, I mean, there was an organic I mean, in all art forms, there was kind of an organic development, because if you look at like catacomb paintings or Roman frescoes, you know, the ones that have survived, you know, they do look a lot like icons. But something that really interested me about icon paintings too is they have what are they? Oh, painters manuals.
Right.
Yeah, and that kind of almost because there's a certain what's the word? Oh, I don't know. But I mean, it even goes further back, even from Rome to like ancient Egyptian, where there was a certain,
right.
you know, the pharaoh and the gods were depicted in a certain way.
Yeah.
So it's even more ancient than Rome. It goes back, I mean, all the way.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's you know, there's connections. Like every single culture on the planet has a rich history of sacred art, and art in general, but sacred art in particular. And that, I mean, it's more developed in some areas of the world than others. Obviously, there's some places throughout the world that it's just, you know, lines and squiggles and stuff. But you know, that has specific meaning to that culture within that context. But as far as like Egypt goes, I think it was back. This is pre-Christian. Well, it's around the beginning of the Christian epoch. So I think it's this up until the 2nd or 3rd century. You know, the Fayum mummy portraits.
Right, yeah, they're very,
you know, right, and they're done with encaustic, like hot wax. Probably the single most famous panel icon meaning an icon on wood, like a, you know, not one that's like on a wall or something like that, but like what you have behind you. A panel icon, probably the most significant one in all the Orthodox world, is the Sinai Pantocrator, which I have right here. Not the original. I wish I had the original.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? That's awesome. That's at St. Catherine's Monastery.
It's at St. Catherine's, yeah, and I'm terrible at Zoom, so there we go.
No, it looks awesome, yeah.
Yeah, that's probably my favorite icon of Christ. I think a lot of people can say that's their favorite icon of Christ, because it's absolutely gorgeous. The way it was done, and the other thing is the historical significance of it, because we don't really have any panel icons from before what was called the Iconoclast Controversy, which you spoke of earlier, which is about 100 years, from like 730 to 842. There's a little bit of a respite in the middle, but there's about 100 years there where there was this all-out assault on iconography. And it culminated in an ecumenical council where we actually, I guess, set in stone that iconography is not only important to the Orthodox faith, but you can't really have the Orthodox faith without iconography. You can't have authentic Christianity without iconography. I know that might burn the ears of some people, but anyway, that's kind of a deep pool to jump into. But yeah, Sinai. It's not just this icon of Christ. They have a lot of panel icons and a lot of I forget the specific name of it's a certain type of scroll. They have a treasure trove of icons from antiquity, because they weren't really as affected by the craziness going on during the Iconoclast heresy because of where they were at. So I think a lot of it was hidden and stuff too. But yeah, besides the one in Egypt at the monastery there, we don't really have any good representations of panel iconography before the Iconoclast Controversy. So
no, you're right. One other point I wanted to hit on too.
Yeah,
I think the difference between iconography and say Western art, let's say Renaissance, is that there's the source of light. I would say in iconography, it tends to emanate from within. It doesn't. There's
right.
Not like you talked about shadow. There's not like a source of light within the painting.
Mm-mm.
Painting is the source of light.
Right, because it's the person being pictured is transfigured.
Right.
You know, so that's why you don't see, like, for example, let's say a saint was missing an ear or had an arm cut off or something like that. In an icon, you don't see well, tattoos. Let's say it's, you know, a saint. I'm not going to be a saint. Trust me. I'm light years away from being a saint. But let's say there was some kind of physical malady or a tattoo or something like that. You're not going to see those representations of decay or disfigurement on an icon, even though it might be something that stands out on that particular person, because an icon is a representation of that person transfigured. And so when you said that there seems to be light emanating from it, it's partly due to the way that it's painted, you know, the process in which it's painted. And I can go into,
I want to ask you about that too. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I can go into a really nerdy explanation about how the light travels through the pigment, and you know, I'll spare you that because everybody will be snoring by the end of that. But that's why you see gold a lot of the times in the background, because it's a representation of how the person depicted is transfigured. So
I have to say, like, you see that luminosity. I mean, I've seen it, but I've only seen reproductions and books and stuff of this stuff. Is in Andrei Rublev. There's that luminosity.
Absolutely.
There, I mean, people might only know him from that. What's that? Tchaikovsky. What's the name of that movie? There was a movie.
The movie. I think it's just Rublev.
Yeah, Andrei Tchaikovsky, I think was but he was a Russian. Well, you would know more than me. I think 15th century Russian iconographer. Not a lot survives of his work, but I mean, what there is awesome. And,
absolutely.
I want to talk about him a little later, but I think you see that luminous quality in his work. You know.
Absolutely. I'd say, I mean, I love Russian iconography. I love Russian spirituality in general. For people that aren't Orthodox, aren't familiar with Orthodoxy, when I say I love Russian spirituality, it's Orthodoxy. It's Orthodox spirituality. It's all the same. But in America, we live sort of well, everyone knows America's kind of weird in general, but Orthodoxy in America is kind of strange sometimes, because even though we're united in faith, like I can go, you know, to the Russian church and the Serbian church and have communion, but the spiritualities are a little different because of the culture from whence you know Orthodoxy came to our country. So I mean, that's changing. You know, the Antiochian Archdiocese has been really good about maintaining a lot of their small t traditions, but at the same time, because of the influx of converts, an organic culture, an organic American Orthodox culture is sort of growing. Now that's a good thing and a bad thing in some ways, but it's just a natural part of it. But yeah, I mean, Russian Orthodox iconography definitely has this luminous, transcendent, ethereal look to it, and it's different even in like the different areas of Russia that you go to. I mean, there's whole schools and styles that are just real specific to like Novgorod. And, you know, they had sort of their golden age, and then that spilled over into this other area. I mean, it's the same thing in Greece. Like when you see Cretan style icons, which if I were to show someone an icon, like a fresco from like Panselenos, that would be probably what people think of when they think Byzantine icon, you know, or like the Cretan style icon, where, you know, the shadow tone is like a dark olive green, and then the highlights on the face are like this bright yellow, and there's gold, and everything is sort of like, I've had people ask me, you know, why is Jesus' head so small? Like Westerners always ask me, like, why does it look weird, you know? And so I have to kind of explain those things. But yeah, I mean, each culture has their own way of presenting these truths and presenting the canonical tradition of iconography. And I don't know. I think as Americans, we're very lucky. I know a lot of American Orthodox complain about that, and I used to, you know, that we weren't this like monolithic Orthodox, you know, organization. And I had a lot of more vitriolic Roman Catholics kind of use that against us. But in some ways, it's kind of
the Catholics aren't homogeneous either. They're all over the place. I mean, liturgically, theologically, aesthetically, in the way that churches look, all over.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I was a Roman Catholic, I mean, when I say was, like, I'm not an angry convert to Orthodoxy. I harbor no ill will towards Rome. In fact, I love the West and Roman Catholicism so much that I mean, I've lost Orthodox friends because of my opinions about Rome that we won't go into right now. But yeah, I mean, I noticed that too. Like if I go to a traditional Latin Mass, it's an entirely different culture. You know, obviously the Mass is different, but everything's different about it than when I go to like a Novus Ordo Mass, you know what I mean? So I don't know. I think a lot of these issues that we fixate on about unity, I think, and we kind of throw stones at each other over that kind of stuff. And I don't know, it kind of gets to me, but.
Through my own experience with Orthodoxy, I would say it's more unified than the West.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, liturgical, I mean, the differences I saw, I mean, because I've had experience with Western Orthodoxy here in San Francisco, and then I was on a retreat at St. Tikhon's, which is the Orthodox Church of America seminary back in Pennsylvania.
Right.
And a lot of the liturgy there was in English, and then in San Francisco, I guess it's in Slavonic, I guess.
Right.
So, I mean, there was a language difference, but, you know, that's kind of, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not crazy like Catholicism.
No, and yeah, I mean, to be honest, like we have our problems, Rome has theirs, and I don't know. I really think now isn't the time to be throwing stones or mud at either of each other's churches. We have more in common than we have, you know, not in common. We have, I mean, there's obvious problems. I'm not a syncretist. I'm not someone that'll say everything's the same, and it's because that's above my pay grade. You know, people that are way smarter than me, people that have studied this, you know, well-intentioned people that convert end up in the Catholic Church and they end up in the Orthodox Church. Well-intentioned people that love Christ, that are following, you know, what they think God's will is for their lives, they end up in either one of those churches. So I tend to hold my judgment against that. I know that's a popular thing to do on YouTube, which is make this is why Roman Catholicism is wrong videos, or this is why Orthodox are, you know, heretics, you know, or whatever. Like, I just think that stuff is sort of pointless, and I don't know.
I agree with you. I wanted to talk a little bit about subjects, and I remember the word I was trying at a hierarchy. I mean, in ancient Egyptian art, there was a hierarchy where,
right.
This is probably I don't know if I'm correct in this, but from my observation, it seemed like the higher the not the deity, but there was a hierarchy where deities were it was very regimented the way they were depicted. And then the pharaohs, and then sometimes you saw like the common people and working in the fields or something. There was almost kind of like a more loose, impressionistic kind of
I see what you mean.
Yeah, attitude. And I think you kind of see that in iconography too, where it's very regimented. Almost sometimes I think you do have a little more free form, maybe with the saints, and I've seen that with like icons of like Saint Mary of Egypt or something, where it's a little different than what you would see like of the Theotokos or something. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, even for example, like I'm definitely not an expert in wall painting and fresco. I've done a little bit of it, and but that's definitely not my forte. But I do know that like as far as hierarchy goes, well, the way like if you go inside of an Orthodox church, there's a very distinct, purposeful way as to how each scene is laid out. Why Christ is above you. You know, there's icons that go specifically where they're supposed to go, painted on the wall for a reason. But more specifically, like you were talking about the serfs working in the field or whatever in Egyptian iconography. Like if you look in, I don't know, like the healing of the paralytic, you look at that fresco, you'll notice that there's some people, not everyone has a halo, obviously, but some people, they're in profile,
right?
You know, where you never really see that in iconography except in certain instances. And usually that's like Judas is generally portrayed in profile. And that's generally not a good thing. You don't want to be, it's not always this horrible thing like that, you know, it's the person's like this terrible degenerate or something. But generally, when you see someone portrayed in profile like that, it's usually Judas or something like that. So,
yeah. And then I was wondering if you could comment a little bit on this subject. So there's of course, the Theotokos, Our Lady, and usually holding the Christ child, the Pantocrator, the Dormition. And then I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the Iconostasis a little bit. I know there's a lot there.
Yeah, that's a pretty big
for beginners.
Yeah, that's a pretty big
for beginners.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I'll give kind of a basic understanding of what I wish I had a visual reference too. That would have been
I think
nice. But,
I think most people know what an iconostasis looks like, or what an icon of Our Lady, Our Lady Perpetual Help, or
what specifically about like the iconostasis, because I mean,
well, what
like
we don't that would be kind of a crude analogy. I don't know. The only thing that we could think of is like the altar rail, which is like but what is the iconostasis? So what is it?
Well, I mean, the origin of it, I mean, I've been doing some research on this recently. There's sort of an idea that it came about in tandem with the way that the Eucharist was understood in Orthodoxy, as far as it applies to the laity. So like you go into some Russian churches and there's an iconostasis that goes all the way to the ceiling, right?
Yeah.
And it's got icons all over it. Those tend to have come about roughly around the time where, not always, but roughly around the time where people would only take communion like once a year. And what was going on the other side of the iconostasis was a little more secret than what the laity was seeing. I mean, a lot of people came like I know in the Catholic Church, you go to Mass and most people, I mean, this could be a bad thing too. Most people take communion every single time they go, no matter if they've been to confession or whatnot. Some people do, and it's the same in Orthodoxy too. But there was a period of time where communion wasn't this something that everyone did every single Sunday. Sometimes priests would come out with the chalice and immediately turn around because no one would come up and get communion. But
it wasn't a community event like it is now.
No, and
it was a God sacrifice, yeah.
Exactly, and it was mostly like a priest's thing and a hierarchy thing. Like the bishops and the priests, they all kind of did that thing behind that wall, the iconostasis, and we're just sort of out here praying or standing around. I know in the traditional Latin Mass, it's not uncommon to see people like praying the Rosary during everything that's going on. I bet recently I went to a few Latin Mass. I think it was just low Mass or whatever, and I had, not having gone for a while, it was interesting now that I'm so familiar with the Orthodox liturgy to see some of the parallels and timing and stuff. But I found that interesting. There was a lot of people praying the Rosary, and like, for example, when you go to like a Russian liturgy, especially if you don't know Slavonic or Russian, it's very common for Westerners to just pray the Jesus prayer because you don't really, the rhythm of the liturgy, but you don't really remember what's going on. So, but yeah, I mean, as far as the iconostasis goes, it started to sort of shrink as that understanding of the Eucharist and how it was beneficial for the laity that idea started to gain more popularity. And
now there's 3 doors, Shayne. So, right, 3 doors?
Right, yeah. Well,
there's a center door and 2 side, right?
Yeah, right off to the side, and throughout the liturgy, the priest, the deacons, and the priests, and who's ever serving will come out. Generally, the main doors. When you go in, I'm going to try to not use orthodoxies, but you go to an Orthodox church, and the iconostasis is up, and you'll have the priest will be standing out in front, and then you'll have icons of you'll have Christ. Right. Like, let's say, as the viewer here, let's say that they're facing. In an Orthodox church, they're facing the iconostasis. So when you're looking directly at it, off to the right, you'll have Christ, and off to the left, you'll have the Mother of God, the Theotokos. Now, it could be, there's a lot of different models or prototypes or versions of the Theotokos that you could have. And the same with Christ. There's a lot of different ones, but generally there's a handful that most Orthodox usually use. And so from there, then you'll usually have the Archangel Michael. Right. You'll have angels kind of guarding the doors, the 2 doors off to the side. and then you'll have St. John the Baptist, John the Forerunner, and then usually the patron of the parish. So like, for example, there was a church called Christ the Savior that we used to go to, and the icon we had up was the Theophany. So it's different per Orthodox, whatever Orthodox church you go to. There's different layouts and customs, whether it's a Russian church or a Greek church, but generally Christ and the Theotokos and St. John the Baptist and angels. You might, on the top of the iconostasis, you might have the apostles, the Last Supper. Yeah. It just depends, but there's definitely like a mainstay canonical way of laying out the iconostasis that most people that are canonically Orthodox, they don't deviate from, because that's part of the tradition. So,
and then in an Orthodox church too, you have other icons. And one of the things that was real interesting too, when I first started going to Orthodox churches, is that people are show their devotion to the icons. They kind of do a little pilgrimage through each one, and they bow and they make the sign of the cross.
Yeah, and some people, I remember when I first started visiting an Orthodox church, it was a little weird because throughout the service, people would sort of wander around. Now, some priests might say that they shouldn't be doing that. I've heard that before, that, oh, you shouldn't do that, that's distracting. But I mean, almost every Russian church I've been to, people sort of, I don't want to say wander around, but they'll go and venerate, icons during the service, during most of the service. So for me, when I first saw that, it was a little weird. Like, if anybody listening is going to go check out, an Eastern Catholic or an Orthodox service, there's a lot of stuff like that you'll notice that there's not really as far as the laity goes, there's not really like,
well, there's no pews too, and people are standing.
No.
So,
well,
yeah.
in like most churches, in the Greek churches there are, but I mean, there's some organs in some old Greek churches, which is, I mean, that's like a huge scandal to a lot of Orthodox. But as far as like the Russian church goes, even like the monastery that I go to over, you know who Abbot Trifon is?
No.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, I'll send you some of his stuff. He's a pretty well-known Russian Orthodox monk. He's my spiritual father. The same thing as like a spiritual director. He's my, real good friend of mine, real close with him. And he's the abbot of a monastery in Seattle, a Russian Orthodox monastery in Seattle, on a little island in the Sound called Vashon Island. It's this like beautiful, picturesque island. And I go out there a few times a year. And when you go to the liturgy at their small monastery, not all the time, but sometimes if they're real Russian, if the people coming are super Russian, they'll segregate into women and men. Like, cool. There's still some parishes that do that, and it's not like, the babushka will smack you if you go over on that side or something. But that's not uncommon. That used to be how it was, all the way back in the day. So little stuff too, like when I'm at the monastery, we'll take our shoes off when we go in.
Oh, that's cool.
And, yeah, there's cool little things. So the faith is the same, but one of the most amazing things that struck me about Orthodoxy, especially in America, is that each cultural iteration of Orthodoxy has its own neat little things about it that you won't encounter in like the Serbian church versus the Russian church, So even with the iconostasis, there's differences. So
one of the things that intrigued me about the iconostasis too is that even when I was staying at St. Tucum's in Pennsylvania, they get pilgrims there, and I was there for a couple of days. And one pilgrim, I assume, was Orthodox. They seemed Orthodox. They seemed to know what they were doing. One got a little too close to the iconostasis, and I don't know, one of the monks was there, and he in the nicest way he could, he said, like, get back. So that is a sacred space, which has been preserved in Orthodoxy, and unfortunately, and I'm not going to bash Roman Catholicism, but that's been lost because the sanctuary in a lot of Catholic churches, it's a free-for-all. I mean, people don't know where the tabernacle is. There's people are wandering in and out. That you don't have in Orthodoxy. Correct me if I'm wrong, just the priest and the deacons are permitted behind the iconostase.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, there's no women allowed back there no matter what.
Right.
So absolutely no women are allowed. And I won't go into that, but yeah, there's no women allowed. And in order to go back behind there, you need to get a blessing from the priest. You can't just wander back there. Like there's been many liturgy where me and my son have served. And when I go in there, you know, you stop and you kiss the priest's hand, you get a blessing from the priest, and you make a prostration for you. And, you know, it's little stuff like that, like in our modern world, prostrations and kissing the hand of a priest. You know, a lot of that stuff seems kind of weird to Westerners, and and even people that grew up Catholic, that might be pious Catholics. I'll say that I'm not super familiar with Eastern Catholicism. I know a lot of it is very similar. But you know, a lot of the customs and stuff like that is really similar to Orthodoxy. But as far as it goes, like pertaining to like our secular society, I remember when, I think it was like the second or third liturgy that I'd ever attended, and just sort of watching all of these people, these normal Americans. You know, there's a doctor over here. Me, well, I'm not normal, but you know, people that just lead these normal lives, going in here and doing these weird things, you know, like bowing to the ground and doing the sign of the cross backwards, you know, and kissing this icon and lighting candles and all that stuff. At first, it didn't weird me out from a place of like, this is idolatry. It was just weird for me to see people being reverent in a very, in a way that wasn't so individualistic. You know, like it was a communal thing. Everyone was sort of doing that as a community. Individually within that community, they were doing that, and it was very ritualistic. And as Americans growing up in sort of a Protestant ethos, ritual sort of is a dirty word. Like, you know, ritual or traditions of men. There's all these like sort of dirty words and ideas that I don't know, are devoid from the life of the average, a lot of Protestants, and especially people that are secularized. So for me, going in there from a Novus Ordo Catholic Mass, and seeing all this stuff and seeing all these people that were generally normal doing all these weird things, it was very interesting. And I kind of wondered, that's sort of what got my wife too, you know, like I remember our parish priest at the time, before she had met them, he said, don't bring her to liturgy first. Come to my house and we'll have dinner and we'll get to know you guys, and then bring her to church. Because if you bring her to this liturgy, you know, coming from a totally secular, non-religious family, she's going to think that we're like, you know, that the feds are kind of like, it's, you know, Waco, like we're some compound and the feds are going to come. You know, it's going to be a shock culturally. So
your wife was raised in any sort of denomination?
No, nothing. No, she grew up just, I mean, not in an anti-religious home, but that just wasn't anything of importance to her family. So, I mean, and I grew up in a home that was, I don't want to say similar, because, you know, I had exposure to Catholicism and stuff, but it was never made to be important. And to be honest, that's something that as an adult with our kids, like that's something that I struggle with is trying to figure out how to do that, not being raised with that being normalcy, you know, going to church and reading the Bible. That wasn't normal for us. So it's been a challenge for me in that aspect. But as far as my wife goes, we met with the priest and everything was fine, and she made friends with his daughter. And then when we went to liturgy, she was able to look past the things that were kind of weird and connect kind of the interpersonal thing with it. So, but yeah, that stood out to me. And then the icons, you know, coming back full circle to what we're talking about, the iconography was striking, because even without any theological understanding, what was represented there,
right,
you knew was sacred and had some type of spiritual significance. And I mean, that's, in a nutshell, that's sort of the whole point of all of it. It's a pictorial representation of theological truths, you know, because back in the day, not everybody could read, you know,
No.
Most people couldn't read. And so, yeah, the iconography sort of served as passive and active catechesis when people would come in and go to the liturgy.
Yeah. I wanted, before I get into talk to you about iconography, the technique, I wanted to just one other thing about just generally the mystery, which I think is inherent in icons, is this is outside my field of expertise, but I'm going to give it a shot. I kind of think that because I mean I know more about Western art than Eastern Orthodox, but you know, in especially in Western theology, there's medieval scholasticism, which is this directive to know God,
right?
That man can know God. And I think in Western art, this almost created an atmosphere for like over familiarity. Even in sacred art, where there was where it produced profanity, and I'm thinking like mainly like the Mannerists, like if you know like Parmigianino, who did these even when I was in art history, when I was studying art history, they bothered me. They were the Mannerists. They were, I thought profane, and you don't see that in iconography, but then also I think in Western art you had a tendency toward this cloying sentimentality, which
right.
I don't mean to bash these two artists. Francis and Richard Hook are those are the ones I always go to. They're famous for like the Laughing Christ. And,
yeah.
And I think that had to do with that overfamiliarity that also I think bounced off the liturgy, which became slack and
right.
became all about the community and let's join hands and
right.
Let's sing the St. Louis Jesuits. So I don't
right.
know. There's my little theory there.
No, you're right. And a lot of I'm a little gentler on the West. Okay. Well, because I oil paint. I love Caravaggio. I love Western.
Oh, I do too. I do too.
I love it, and there are criticisms from a spiritual perspective, and I understand all that, and I agree in some ways, about the Renaissance. I think some Orthodox, the more zealous types, will take it a little far and kind of turn it into this big macro narrative about everything wrong in the world is because of Western Renaissance philosophy and art. Like atheism can be traced back to the Baroque. Like, to me, that is just like, it's an oversimplification of history. And I think we need to stop doing that on both sides of the East-West thing. I think we need to be honest and stop oversimplifying and sort of devaluing the good that's there. So like I saw this stupid meme going around about, someone saying that Roman Catholics say that they're against pornography, but look at all the naked people in their churches. And it's like every single piece of art that was listed on this dumb meme wasn't even in a church. It was like some piece that, I don't know, somebody painted or whatever, and it's like, so I think the approach is different as far as like the sensuality and the hyper humanistic philosophy behind some of it. But I agree with what you said. And I think that one of the things that the Orthodox have gotten right, as far as this goes, I think the most important thing that the Orthodox have gotten right is sort of preserving that separation. Like, God is other, and the icon is a way to represent Christ, because God became flesh, right? So the icon is a way to represent Christ, but at the same time, like, I understand why there would be sort of a hesitation to be over familiar with presenting Christ as maybe too sentimental, too much like this like shining little cute baby, or the Virgin Mary maybe with her breasts exposed, that sort of stuff. I think you're right. And it definitely does have a tendency to snowball and get maybe extremes, not the word, but a little more in your face as time goes by. And some of that influenced the Russian church. There was a huge influx of Western culture, after Peter the Great. And, there is that tradition in Russia as well, not to the degree, obviously, that it is in the West, but I love that iconography too. I absolutely love some of that stuff, but it lost its connection to the deep transcendent spiritual roots of Orthodox iconography that sort of place it above art or some representation of a biblical story, if that makes sense. There's like I said earlier about the person being portrayed as transfigured. So I wrote something recently about how iconography is much, I wrote some rant about something that I was ranting about, but at the end I wrote, iconography is much simpler than that, but at the same time it's more profound. And it's sort of this weird paradox where there are deep spiritual truths wrapped up in iconography that you can't plumb with a lifetime. At the same time, a child can look at an icon and fully understand and embrace what's going on there. I don't know if that sounds like too artsy and pretentious, but I think that's one of the things that draws people to iconography is it's maintained that healthy separation between God and man, while at the same time, it's a way to, in a tactile way, connect yourself with Christ, if that makes sense. So
yeah, no, it does. It does. And then I want to talk about technique with you. If you could talk about, the binding medium, which is egg yolk,
right.
and I think a lot of people, and then the chalk layer and the wood and all that stuff.
Right. Yeah. So, well, there's a couple different ways you can paint a panel icon.
I mean, it's not traditional to paint an icon on canvas, so that you buy at Michael's, like you could do.
Definitely not. I mean, the only application where you would paint on canvas is like, I'll kind of explain this real quick. So a lot of the times people that do wall paintings or frescoes, they're not real frescoes because fresco is actually a technique, it's a medium. But if you go into like a big Greek Orthodox church, you'll see all these giant wall paintings on the walls. And that's sort of what stands out in people's mind as far as like iconography, right? So the reason why canvas is used now is because the building materials have changed over the years. So, back years ago, a church would be made of stone and they would use actual plaster. And so what you would have to do is you'd have to mix up as much plaster and lime or however they do it. And you would place that on the wall and you would have a specific amount of time to do whatever you were painting because it would dry. And what happens is they paint on that fresco and, or they paint the fresco on the wall and the illustration, the icon becomes a part of the wall. It actually goes into and becomes one with the wall.
Like the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel for everybody.
That's exactly how that was done. Yeah. And that's just how the technique was back then. They didn't have modern art materials. Nowadays, because things are built with drywall, which is dust, congealed dust over paper, it's not really long lasting. And so if there's a leak in the roof and there's a big storm and water gets into the drywall, it's toast. So you don't want to be painting these big wall paintings on drywall when there's a chance that something could happen. So usually what they do is a lot of iconographers will paint on canvas. So they'll go to a church, they'll be contacted, the iconographer and his team will be contacted by the priest or whoever is interested in their iconography. Somebody will go out to the church, they'll take measurements, they'll talk to the priest, and they'll kind of figure out where everything's going to go. They'll go back to their studio in Greece or America or wherever they are, and they'll paint on canvas. They'll measure it out and they'll paint everything on canvas. What they'll do then is they'll roll up the canvas, ship it, or take it to the church that it's going to be in, and they'll install it. It's a technique called maroflage. I think I'm butchering the pronunciation, but
sounds good. And
just think of it like wallpaper, to be honest. But it's canvas, so it's not that simple where they just paste it up and there it is, because they have to connect scenes and iconographers that are really good at this, unless you get real close up on it, it looks like a big fresco because there's a technique with hiding the seams, and then they go in and hand paint, ornamentation and stuff over it. So it's not as simple as just gluing pictures to the wall. It's a lot more complicated. I've
seen the ones that like Pigments Sofronov did at Joey Valhusaro. Is that how he did it? You think?
I'm not sure. In San Francisco?
Yeah.
I don't think so, because I don't know, to be honest, because I don't think so. I don't really know the technique used, to be honest, because I don't think that that was done until fairly recently, the whole canvas thing. But I know that's real popular in Greece. In Russia, they tend to use a process called silicate, which is, it's not like fresco, but it is like fresco. It's a specific kind of, you get the same result where the pigment becomes one with the substrate in the wall. So, but that's a whole other technical process that'll bore people to death. So I won't go into that. But as far as the process of making a panel icon, I can actually, let me grab this.
Go ahead.
Okay, so let me put this Shokti down here, so I don't know if you can see that.
Oh, beautiful. Saint Panteleimon, is that how you say it?
Pantaleimon,
Pantaleimon.
you know, yeah. So I painted that probably
Cool.
2 years ago. So this is done in egg tempera. Oh my gosh, you can't see on Zoom here.
No,
this
I
is
can
done
see it. Good.
Okay, this is egg tempera. That's 24 karat gold. And it's on a traditional panel that I got in Russia. If you can see the braces in the back. Yeah. I usually order them in bulk because, you know, it's cheaper to get them shipped that way. And they just make.
What kind of wood is it? Is it just? Usually
they're done on linden wood. I don't really know what that is, to be honest. Linden wood. Is that where
linseed? No. Because I mean, we use linseed oil. Yeah, linseed oil is the medium we use in oil painting.
Yeah.
But you guys use yolk, egg yolk.
Yeah, it's traditionally done in egg yolk. Just like anything, things are changing. Like, I'll go into the process with egg yolk, and then I'll go into like acrylic. With egg yolk, what you do is you take an egg yolk and you separate it from the white. You let the water run over it. You separate it from the white, and then you pierce the membrane on the yolk, and it pours out into generally like a squeeze bottle or something. There's a lot of different recipes. Some of them date back to, you know, hundreds of years ago in some of these iconographer manuals that you can find. But generally, a lot of the stuff's just passed down from iconographer to iconographer. I never trained anybody specifically. I'm mostly just self-taught. I've had a lot of help from other professional iconographers. It's a very, very tight-knit community. The iconography community, people generally want to help you out, whereas with other artistic communities, there's a lot of competition and people don't want to help you out. I know that from experience. But with iconography, you get a lot of help and tricks and tips from other icon painters. But anyway, so you'll make the medium, which is the egg yolk, and you'll mix it with water and maybe a little bit of vodka or white wine. Like, I've used just straight white wine. Part of the reason you want to do that is it cuts the fattiness of the egg yolk, and it can make it easier to deal with, basically. And you don't get as much kind of like some pigments will separate from the yolk while you're using them, and it gets kind of greasy. But I don't know. There's a lot of different recipes. So what I'm explaining is just what I do. There's a million other ways to do it. And I'm sure someone will watch this and say, that's not the correct way. But this is just sort of the way I do it. So after you have the yolk, which is the medium, the yolk and the water together, you usually have a container full of dried pigments. Now, generally they're earth pigments. And all that means is that it's a pigment that comes from a natural source. Now, that's not always adhered to because, contrary to popular belief, most professional iconographers they're not Luddites about modern art materials. I know a lot of people think that like every single thing you use has to come from the earth, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with doing it that way. You can do it that way, but modern pigments are used these days. And so you'll mix certain part dry pigment with the egg yolk, and that's kind of what creates your paint. It's honestly as simple as that. The issue comes in when you have to learn the different ratios between different pigments, because some pigments take more egg yolk as opposed to this pigment. It's the same with oil painting, you know, like some, like umbers, for example, they tend to like soak up oil and dry really fast. And, you know, there's other pigments that don't require as much medium. And it's the same way with egg tempera. So now that you have the paint, then you move on to, let me grab this. you move on to the actual board itself. Now, like I said, I don't make the panels because that's an art in and of itself. And
Wow.
I tried to a long time ago. And the advice that I got was you can spend all your time making the panel, or you can spend your time painting. And I highly recommend working on the painting. So, so yeah, I don't make the panels, I order them. And generally a traditional icon panel will have what's called a kovcheg, which is just, I don't know if you, can you see that?
Right,
it's kind
it's
of
an indentation, yeah.
Yeah, there's like an indentation in here. Supposedly there's a theological reason for it, but I think from what I've read, I think it was more of a practicality thing that developed, had a theological reason.
Yeah, mine of the Holy Martyrs has it too.
Yep, that's a gorgeous icon.
And that I got this from Russia. It was right around the time that they were, I don't know what you say in the restaurant, canonized or
canonized,
yeah,
the Romers. Yeah, I love that. That's absolutely gorgeous. But yeah, and what the icon panel maker will do is they'll apply gesso. So I don't have any kind of like half-made panels, but anyway, he'll apply gesso, which is like a traditional gesso is rabbit skin glue, which is exactly what it is. It's glue made from rabbit hide, and chalk and or ground granite. It just depends on where you get it from, but it's sort of mixed up. There's a whole recipe for it, and it's applied onto the board after usually a piece of fabric, like real thin fabric, will be put down, called I think it's an interlagio or something. The reason why that fabric is put down is because wood tends to rot, and the gesso that's used is really super brittle. So if there's like this fabric layer down, it prevents the wood grain from raising, and it usually prevents cracking. And even in older icons that we have now that have like the wood has deteriorated,
and they buckle too sometimes. Yeah,
all of them buckle. Yeah, even with those braces in the back, they all buckle, over time generally. But those braces definitely help to stop the buckling. But anyway, once the gesso's on, it's then sanded smooth to a really smooth kind of glassy surface. And the reason that you want that is because generally you're going to want to apply gold either on the halo or around the entire background. And if there's any imperfections in that gesso, gold leaf is like super thin. It's like a molecules thin, and you're going to see all of that stuff. So anyway, so yeah, as far as that goes, you can either, when it comes to applying the gold, there's like 3 or 4 different techniques to that. I tend to use a more modern technique, which it's called oil gilding. I don't do water gilding because, to be honest, I've never learned it. And it's sort of a technical thing that you have to have someone show you in person generally. And I've just not had the opportunity to learn from someone. So I do what's called oil gilding. And it's basically like an oil-based varnish that you put on that sets up its self-leveling. And then it gets not sticky, but not completely dry. And then you place the gold on it. Okay, so well, before that, you're going to want to transfer your drawing. But once the gold's on it, then you can kind of start painting. And there's definitely a process. Like if you were to want to start painting icons as a spiritual discipline, which a lot of people do that, there's definitely prayers you want to say before you begin. You want to make sure you've gone to confession.
I wanted to talk to you about that.
Okay, yeah, that's really important because, and I'm guilty of I'm not gonna sit and pretend like I'm some holy monk or something like that. I'm not. Like,
oh, come on.
No, not even close. I'm definitely guilty of taking that aspect of it for granted because I'm an artist, I'm a tattooer by trade, and I'm a professional painter and iconographer, and I get sort of wrapped up in that aspect of it that I a lot of the times forget the spiritual aspect of it. I get more wrapped up sometimes in making it visually beautiful that sometimes I forget, personally, like I forget, hey, maybe you should say this prayer beforehand, and recently God's been really reminding me of that and how integral that is to the process, because it's not a piece of art. It is, but it's more than just a piece of art, it's much more than that. So
I wanted to read you something real quick.
Go for it.
This is from, I ruin all these Russian names. Leonid
Ouspensky.
Thank you, Ouspensky.
Yeah.
The Meaning of Icons. That's a good book. I'll recommend it.
Absolutely. Fantastic book.
Oh, good. Okay. This is what he wrote this. I thought this was really cool. The task of an iconographer has much in common with the task of a priest officiating. Theodosius the Hermit draws a definite parallel between them. He says, quote, "The divine service of icon representations draws its origin from the holy apostles. The priest and the iconographer should be either chaste or married and living in accordance with the laws. For the priest officiating with divine words prepares the body of which we participate for the remission of sins, while the artist, instead of using words, draws and images a body and gives it life, and we venerate icons for the sake of their prototypes. Just as the priest can neither alter liturgy's text at his discretion, nor bring into their reading any emotions as many impressed upon the faithful, his personal state or perception, so also an iconographer must conform to, the image consecrated by the church, introducing no personal or emotional content, but placing all those who pray before one and the same reality, and leaving each person free to react to the extent of his possibilities and in accordance with his character, his needs, his circumstances, and so forth." I thought that was really cool. So the iconographer kind of as a priest, for lack of a better word.
Right.
And then, really being not responsible, what's the word? Being responsible to tradition. Right. So
I think, yeah, I mean, Ouspensky is like, you can read his books a million times and not even scratch the surface. It's incredible, his stuff. But yeah, I think as an iconographer, my goal is to disappear. So when I paint an icon, I haven't reached this point yet, I should say. My goal is to disappear, is to not be like, I don't want people to look at my icons and go, "Oh, Shayne did that, and it's so beautiful, and he did a great job." Because as an artist, one of my weaknesses is arrogance and pride. And a lot of artists do what they do because they have some sort of personal deficit. They have some sort of self-worth issue. I've been an artist for my whole life, and I work around artists every day, all day. Not every artist, but most artists in their interior life, they have a self-worth issue. And so what they do is they're
tortured.
Yeah, I mean, that's a kind of that's like a really, like, it's a cliche or whatever, but
it's true though.
It's true. And I mean,
but I have to say, sorry to interrupt you, the best artists I knew that were tortured.
Oh yeah. Well, it's true. I mean, look at Caravaggio. I mean, he led a absolutely terrible, tortured life. I mean, he wasn't a great guy, but look at somebody like Caravaggio, or like, I don't know, most of the great Western painters, besides maybe Rubens, who, was a sort of like a debonair playboy or whatever. But yeah, I mean, most artists have this like issue and something that's eating at them. And a lot of the times you'll produce art, and I'm just speaking from myself personally, you'll produce art not just for the adulation of other people, because that's not why I do it. I mean, if that was the only reason you did it, then you wouldn't stick with it very long. I absolutely love painting, I love painting iconography, but I have to check myself because it's very easy to get, praise and applause from people when you're producing something that might be high quality, or, like, it's very easy to allow that praise to drive you, and you have to sort of learn how to ignore that. And so iconography is different than like if I was just a portrait painter, because as a portrait painter you can use that, and if you're wise, you can harness that and benefit from that praise and that egotism. As an iconographer, though, you can't do that, because the purpose isn't for people to applaud and say, Shayne, you did a beautiful icon. My goal as an icon painter, my end goal, you know, like the macro, like the big goal is for me to serve God and serve the church and disappear, you know, like the icons that I do, I want to be beautiful, but I strive to make them in accord with the canonical tradition of the church. That's what Ouspensky's talking about there. Part of what he's talking about. The iconographer's job isn't to revolutionize and be this artiste and get all this adulation and praise because they painted this beautiful icon. As an iconographer, you have to ignore that. And you have to, that's why it's important to stay within the life of the church, why you need to go to confession, and why you need to be aware of that stuff. Because even if you're painting iconography as a hobby or a spiritual practice, art is one of the things that you can do is art. One of the things you can do if you want praise, if you want to indulge your pride, do art. Get really good at art or music, because people will come out of the woodwork to praise you. And I mean, rightly so in some aspects, you know, because people like beautiful things. And if you're blessed with the ability to produce something beautiful, you know, people are going to applaud that, and they're going to give their genuine appreciation. And there's nothing wrong with that. But as an iconographer, you're an artist, but you're not an artist. That's not the function. It's just like someone chanting in church. You know, you go to a big Russian Orthodox church, and there's this magnificent, beautiful choir, you know, and it's beautiful. And you know, you can strive to be the best chanter there, but if you're doing it because you want that praise, then it's you know, straw, you know, it's straw before God. Like it completely and utterly misses the point. And, you know, God can take anything and utilize it. I'm not saying that, you know, if I painted an icon and I hadn't gone to confession that week, or maybe I wasn't in the best state spiritually, I'm not saying that it's not an icon. And there are people out there that assert those sort of extreme positions. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, at the end of the day, if I'm blessed with the ability to look back on my life, you know, in some kind of reflective way, I want to be able to at least say that the iconography that I produced for Christ's church wasn't about me. It wasn't about me getting adulation or me being some iconic icon painter that revolutionizes iconography. I want people to look at it and pray with the icons that I make and forget about me, you know. And I haven't reached that yet. I'm not trying to sound like this hyper spiritual person that, you know, I have a pretty shallow spiritual life. And I think all of us, I think all of us, you know.
But artists are their own worst critics. I mean, that's why they destroy a lot of what they make. So
yeah, I mean, it's I think that's a good thing in some aspects, just because there's nothing worse than an artist who thinks that they're the best artist.
Oh, well, they're usually not. Yeah,
they're usually not. That's the thing. They're usually not very good. Although I have met some guys in the tattoo industry that are just these amazing world-class tattooers, and they think they're the best. And
oh well,
yeah,
okay.
But anyway, so I didn't mean to kind of rabbit trail there with the
that was
introspective spiritual insights, but I know there's going to be people watching this, Catholic or Orthodox, that want to paint iconography, and that's apart from technical stuff. Like, if anybody wants to message me with technical questions, I'll share anything that I know, because everything that I know was given to me by another painter, or I've discovered through reading in books that are out there. There's no secrets, really. So if anybody wants to message me, I'll tell you that. But as far as the most important thing, if you're gonna paint an icon, don't do it for any other reason than to grow spiritually, than to connect with Christ and or to serve the church. That's the point. Priests shouldn't become priests in order to be priests. You know, it's the same with iconography or any other thing, where any other job or vocation in the church, you have to do it for the right reasons. And there's a distinct danger in anything in the arts when it comes to doing it for Christ, doing it for the church, where I really think Satan, the forces of evil, I really think prey upon that propensity as an artist to want praise. So if that's the only advice I give iconographers.
Yeah.
are budding like that.
And it's not that there's no individuality in iconography. I
No.
mean, he talks about this here. Ouspensky. I mean, you can always tell an Andrei Rublev or a Sofronov. I mean, they're pretty.
But that comes out on its own. That's the thing. Is it sort of like, okay, when you go to a liturgy or even like a high mass, you know, you go to the mass and it's sung, or the priest, specifically the priest is chanting. He's saying words that were passed down to him. There's, you know, he's saying the same words as this priest said or whatever, you know, throughout however long that liturgy's been around. That's the tradition that's being passed down to him. But naturally, it sounds different because he's an individual that has his own voice. But he's not going there, you know, doing the liturgy, chanting the liturgy, thinking, I'm going to do this so I can be an individual. I want people to hear my voice because I'm a good singer, and everyone's going to love my mass because I chanted it so well. I mean, you shouldn't be thinking that if you're a priest. But no matter what, it's, you know, for better or worse, it's going to sound a certain way because we're all individual. We all have our own voice, right? So when you approach iconography without that in mind, it naturally will come about. You'll naturally have your own style, and let's say you're more drawn to Greek icons, you know, like the Cretan icons. You're more drawn to that, and you want to paint iconography within that school, within that tradition. Whereas I'm more into Russian icons, and I want to go that direction. Okay, we have these two, you know, styles of iconography, for lack of a better term. But even though we're going to be trying to paint within those styles, it's going to look, you're going to get that individualism in that expression without even trying. Unless you're just, you know, this person that's like a copy machine and you can make it look exact, which is not the point. There's an iconographer who, his name's Father Patrick. He's this prolific icon painter. He studied with Ouspensky for years. And he's just this amazing guy. I got to hang out with him and meet him a couple years ago when I was down in California. And
I know that monastery is not far from me. Yes, yeah. I think I know which one you're talking about.
Santa Rosa.
It's in Lake.
Well, he's painting a church. He's painting St. Seraphim Cathedral in Santa Rosa.
Oh, but, wow! Yeah. Oh, I know it. Oh, wow! Really?
Have you ever been to that church?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous. And he was talking about Ouspensky. He studied with Ouspensky, and Ouspensky told him that in modern iconography, there's these two extremes where you have these people that are just copying icons, rote, like they're tracing it and putting it down and making it look exactly like it should look. You know, the old models looked, you know, they're just reproducing what was done before. And then you have a group of people who are doing icons and they're being sort of flippant with the tradition, and they're loosely icons, but they're all over the place. There's a specific, not to put anybody on blast, but there's a specific Jesuit iconographer.
Oh, yes, I know exactly who you're talking about.
And I normally don't say anything negative, but that he'll do one of like an Orthodox saint, and then with this really stylized way, and then he'll do one of like Harvey Milk.
He did the Harvey Milk icon.
And that to me was, I mean, I was just like, you know, like it really bothered me. But anyway, so you have that extreme where it's like, it is about expression and whatnot. And Father Patrick said that Ouspensky told him that, you know, those are bad extremes. You don't want to go there. You sort of want to be, I don't want to say in the middle, but you don't want to meet those extremes, because that's not what iconography is. And bringing it back to the whole individual expression thing, essentially that comes about naturally, but you have to immerse yourself in the tradition, and you have to approach it with the humility to know that you might disagree with certain things that you read, or you might learn that this icon symbolizes this, or this is, let's say that this came from, like, for example, the idea that St. Luke painted the first icon. I mean, you could get very, very analytical and disprove that. You know, I mean, you could, but instead of doing that, you could, like in the words of Father Seraphim Rose, crucify your mind. I mean, you hear that a lot in Orthodoxy. It's misused and abused a lot, and people use that a lot of the times just to say, I don't need to use my mind. And that's not what Father Seraphim Rose was talking about. It's about humility. And you don't have to accept these crazy things just because, but if you're living the life of the church and you're trying to be obedient to the church, you're going to have to approach a lot of this stuff with humility, not just iconography, but fasting, all this stuff. And it might not make sense to you and you might not agree with it. I keep air quoting a lot. I don't know why. I normally don't do that, but you might not agree with it. But at the end of the day, it's about immersing yourself in the tradition, because you might be this amazing artist that can do all these wonderful portraits and draw all these wonderful things, and you might be the best in the world, but you might make a garbage iconographer because you're arrogant and you think that you're going to be the next Rublev or something like that. And so it's almost harder for someone that's a really good artist to become a good iconographer, because you have to get over yourself. And as an artist, like I said earlier, we're just sort of wired to be arrogant and wired to be that way. And so I think outside of living an Orthodox life, you shouldn't really be painting iconography or living a spiritual life. You know what I mean? That's why when I see icons in museums, I mean, I appreciate them. Like 2 years ago, I went to San Diego to the Timken. Have you been there?
No.
So the Timken is like I think it's like a private, so it's open to the public, but I think it's privately funded. It's right next to the San Diego Museum of Art, like literally right across from it. And they have a fairly large exhibit of Russian Orthodox icons. And
really? Wow.
Oh yeah. If you like iconography, it's worth the drive down there.
Well, then I gotta go.
Yeah. Yeah. It's in Balboa Park, or that whole area there. Yeah. I lucked out when we were there because there was a touring Spanish Golden Age tour. So I got to see a Velázquez, and it was just one of the best days of my life. But yeah, I got to see all these really old Russian icons, and it was bittersweet because it was nice to be face to face with that and to sit and reflect on what have these icons seen? Like, have they seen the martyring of priests? Because some of them came from an iconostasis in Russia.
Wow.
Have these icons seen priests martyred for the faith? Who owned these? What's the history here? It was nice to be able to go in there and see that. But at the same time, they belong in a church, they belong in a church. And I just, or at least in Russia, you know what I mean? I like having them here to go see them, but they belong in a church or doing what they're supposed to do, But anyway, I don't know. That was kind of a long sermon, a long rant there. I didn't mean to do that, but that's something I'm really passionate about in my own personal life and the life of other iconographers or anybody else. If you want to do something creative in service to God, you need to check your ego and be constantly aware of that, because it's not just going to be like one day you wake up and go, I'm being arrogant. You're just going to be that way and you're not going to notice it. And that's going to hinder your service to God. So
I think if there's not an inner struggle within the artist, I don't think the art is as dynamic, because I always remember Michelangelo, who struggled between his desires and his art, and I think most of the time he got it right. I mean, right. Like in Michelangelo, the David, I think it's a beautiful sculpture, but I think it takes the mind to the beauty of God's creation and God.
Right.
Rather than anything, what would you say, erotic or whatever,
Right. I think, like I said earlier, I think there's a canard with a lot of Orthodox that claim, oh, that's eroticism. And I just think that's honestly kind of a misunderstanding of what's going on in the West as far as Renaissance art. And there's a little bit of that. I mean, I know there's rumors that Michelangelo was gay. I'm sure. Have you heard?
I think he was definitely same-sex attracted. Definitely. Okay. I mean, what I've read, I mean, it's hard to find anything definitive from that time period, because people didn't write about it or talk about it. But from looking at his letters, I think he was. And
really?
But I think he was very much kind of a monk artist. I think he never married. He lived, alone. He had some apprentices but he lived a very kind of monastic life, a very kind of tortured life. I mean, he worked himself literally to death most of the time.
Yeah.
And he was struggling. The struggle was between him and God, and him as desires, but it all reflected, it was all within the framework of his art, which is interesting. I think most of the time he got it right. I think the Last Judgment would got more into mannerism, I think goes off in a certain direction. But I mean, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I've even heard, I love Caravaggio. He's one of my favorite. I love that whole period after him, his influence, you know, the Caravaggisti and all the people who ripped him off, you know, ripped Caravaggio off after that.
He's very Baroque, yes.
Oh,
I saw some of his things in Rome when I was in Rome.
There's an iconographer friend of mine in Rome who's just this profoundly gifted, just amazing iconographer, and he's Italian, but he's Russian Orthodox. I think he's got like Russian background. I don't know if you're connected with him on social media, but he's just a fantastic guy. Been very helpful to me. But we had planned, I was going to come visit and hang out and stay a couple weeks. He lives in Rome, and we had everything. We started planning everything, and then the coronavirus, and so Italy went crazy. So that was like my opportunity to go see all that. You know, and he's from Rome.
Some other day.
Yeah, I hope so. I really want to go see all that stuff in person, but
some other day. Where I got, and I kept you too long. Where I really got where I really got to experience, I think, Byzantine, especially Byzantine art in its intended space was, you know, my dad was Sicilian, and I went to Sicily, and there's some, you don't see it in Constantinople or Istanbul. But in Sicily, because it was kind of a backwater, they have a lot of the Byzantine mosaics, and I saw them in like Chafalu and Montreal, and incredible. It's different than the Gothic. I never got into Gothic art studying it and then when I was in France and saw Gothic art, it is overwhelming kind of spiritually, but my mind was always kind of centered on, wow, they did this, you know, man did this.
Right.
And then they got very competitive, and the vaults had to go higher and higher, and then they start collapsing. But where the Romanesque setting, where a lot of times the Byzantine mosaics are, it's an incredible space.
Yeah.
It transcends the human dimension completely,
right.
I think. And I wasn't so much thinking about some guy did this. I was thinking about, this is incredible. It's like it took me into a different mind headspace. So.
Right. And that's, I mean, that it did its job, you know, that's kind of the whole purpose of all of it. But
yeah, because even the background, the gold background in those mosaics, they weren't just like randomly placed gold tiles. They were like done in a pattern. It was incredible. It was totally crazy. And now you do secular art too, like you got one behind you. Well, Tsar Nicholas is but I mean, your style, I have to say, reminds me a lot of like John Singer Sargent. Like if he had done something.
Well, that's a compliment.
Oh, I love him. Because when I first saw your work online, I was like, wow, that reminds me a lot of John Singer Sargent. But like a lot of good artists, you kind of went in a different direction with it, kind of made it your own. So
yeah, I love Sargent. He's one of my favorite artists. It's just he's so virtuosic that I don't understand a lot of it. You know, I got to see a Sargent in person when I was in San Diego. They had one, and I've never really cried looking at art before, but I think it was just the idea that I was able to see something that he created in person. And I mean, I wasn't like, you know, but I definitely cried when I saw it just because of what it was. But he's one of my favorite painters for sure. Absolutely. Awesome. And Diego Velázquez, I've done a bunch of Velázquez master copies, and I've learned so much from doing a lot. People might not know when you're trying to learn how to paint, you know, in a Western way, like the old masters, it was very common to do master copies. You know, they would travel around because they didn't have the internet. So like, let's say Rembrandt, people from his pupils from his studio, he would send his students to like Milan or wherever, and they would copy these big, beautiful paintings. So they would have them as reference when they get back. And so they would kind of exchange ideas and techniques and all that stuff. And with the internet now, it's really neat because I can access high quality images of like oh gosh, I don't have anything around, but yeah, they're over there. But of like a Diego Velázquez, like Pope Leo, or I think it was Pope Leo, that really famous Diego Velázquez, Pope Innocent maybe. Anyway, a really, really high quality image of that, and I can sit and do a master copy at home. I don't have to travel to the, you know, the museum that it's in. But
is that oil when you do that? When you do those secular
yeah,
paints?
that's
okay.
Yeah, I paint in oil. I paint all those in oil. I've sort of ventured into doing some Russian Orthodox, like academic style iconography, which is very Western influenced. It kind of gets a bad rap now because there's sort of been a Byzantine revival in the 20th century in Russian Orthodox iconography, and sort of a return to the sources. I mean, that's common in, you know, theology and everywhere, but even in Rome, I mean, there's a supposed return to the sources, return to the fathers, or whatever. But as far as iconography goes, that's a really big thing in Russia. And so you do have a lot of people doing more Western academic iconography still over there, but the more Byzantine influenced, old school, like traditional Russian iconography is definitely becoming more popular and on the rise over there.
Thank you so much, Shayne, for spending so
Absolutely.
much time with
Thanks
me.
for having me.
Thank you. Hey, God bless you. God bless your work. God bless your family. And thank you
You
so
too.
much.
Thanks
you.
for having me.